The offseason is upon us, and the Orioles did not wait around to get things going. We'll talk about the acquisition or the reacquisition of Daz Cameron. We'll talk about the decision for Chris Holt to go, and we'll talk about the upcoming offseason schedule coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, November 1st, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, or at least for this episode, recording on Halloween night, I'm your host, Bob Belcher. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to really get you ready for the start of the offseason because it has begun. The World Series is over. Thankfully, the Yankees are not the champions as the Dodgers win it all. We'll talk about the O's making their first move at the offseason, coaching staff-wise, player-wise, and we'll really get you looking at, okay, what dates should you have circled on your calendar for this offseason? And that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. And on today's episode, we will get started with really the beginning of the offseason, as back on Wednesday night, the Los Angeles Dodgers got it done, beating the Yankees 7-6 in Game 5 of the World Series and taking that series in 5. The Dodgers winning another championship, getting a full season title this time. And the best part is the Yankees do not win the title. And the way that the Yankees lost that game, I had recapped a couple of episodes ago, games 1 and 2, when the Dodgers won in LA, and then, kind of a ho-hum Dodger win in Game 3, kind of a ho-hum Yankee win in Game 4 to keep the series alive. And then the Yankees go up 5-0 early with the homers from Judge, Chisholm, and Stanton, and Cole's on the mound, and the Yankee Stadium's rocking. And I'm like, I still thought the Dodgers were going to win the series, but I'm like, this is going to go back to LA for Game 6. And then the most hilarious Yankee meltdown happens in the top of the 5th inning. They make all the errors. They give up 5 runs. The Dodgers come all the way back. Walker Buehler comes out of the pen to close it out in the 9th, maybe future Oriole Walker Buehler. And luckily, we've survived another season with the Yankees not winning the World Series. And if the Orioles can't win the World Series, next up you cheer for the not Yankees. And the not Yankees did win again this year. Congratulations to the Dodgers. Congratulations to former Orioles in Evan Phillips and Jack Flaherty for getting themselves a ring as well. But with the World Series ending on Wednesday night, that means the offseason opened up on Thursday. And we're in kind of an interesting 5-day period right now until we really get into the full offseason next week. But the Orioles did not wait around because we are in a period right now where, although free agency isn't completely open, you can start making trades the day after the World Series ends. And that is what the Orioles did. And that is where we start on this episode. Daz Cameron, the 27-year-old right-handed hitting outfielder, is a Baltimore Oriole once again. The O's acquired him in a minor trade for cash considerations from the Oakland Athletics on Thursday. Cameron is out of options, but he is not yet arbitration eligible, so he'll still be making near the minimum, but he is placed on the 40-man roster. He does have to get a 40-man spot. And Daz Cameron, surprise, surprise, was a 2015 first-round pick of the Houston Astros when Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal were working in that front office. So no surprise there. Now, Cameron was in the big leagues last year. Last offseason, he signed a minor league deal with the Oakland A's, started the year in AAA, but the Athletics called him up on May 23rd, and he actually spent the entirety of the season after May 23rd with the A's on the big league roster. The issue for Cameron was, despite the fact that he was, 4 months of the season straight, he was on the team, he never found a way, even on that bad A's team, to get himself an everyday role. A lot of that was because they were trying out younger players. And although he's only 27, he's kind of more of a known quantity at this point in his career. But he didn't play too much to be on the team for as long as he was. He only appeared in 66 games and had 186 plate appearances for the A's this year. In that stretch, he hit just 200 with a 258 on base and a 329 slugging. That was good for just a 70 WRC plus. He hit 5 home runs. He stole 5 bases. He had a 7% walk rate to a bit high 27.4% strikeout rate on the season for Daz Cameron. Now, kind of who is Cameron? Well, you might know him because Daz Cameron in 2023 was in the Orioles organization. In December of 2022, the Orioles claimed Cameron off waivers from the Detroit Tigers. They eventually outrighted him off the roster after optioning him to AAA, but nobody claimed him on waivers, so the O's got him off the 40-man, but got to keep him in AAA Norfolk, and that is where Cameron stayed for the entirety of the 2023 season with the Norfolk Tides. And he was pretty solid down there, had about 450 plate appearances. He was basically a league average hitter with a 98 WRC plus, but he hit 268. He had 16 homers, good walk rates, low strikeout rates. He was 23 for 29 stealing bases as well down in Norfolk. And there was even a time later in the season, remember all those injury issues that Cedric Mullins was going through, and then kind of Austin Hayes was going through them at the same time. And if you remember in 2023, there was a time that like Mullins and Hicks were both injured, and Hayes was banged up, and Cowser was struggling. And Mike Elias made like kind of an offhand comment. There was some murmurs that Daz Cameron might have been next on the list to actually be called up to the Orioles late in that 2023 season. It never happened. The O's got healthy enough to not do it, but it was a consideration. That's how well he was performing, especially at that point late in the AAA season. But the Orioles eventually ended up releasing him, didn't bring him back last year. He caught on with the A's, and he was able to get back to the big leagues, where he spent a little bit of time in the major leagues with the Detroit Tigers, parts of the 2020, 2021, and 22 seasons with Detroit. Hasn't been a very good big league hitter, 430 plate appearances, 68 WRC plus, but the defense has mostly been there. He's been a solid defensive outfielder. He has played a good amount of all 3 outfield positions at the big league level. He's got 76 percentile sprint speed via StatCast. You like to see that. He steals bases. And there is some underlying data that looks good. He did in the big leagues this year have a 48.8% hard hit rate. If he were qualified, that would have been the 26th best hard hit rate in all of Major League Baseball. That's pretty solid right there. He's got good bat speed numbers, good exit velocity numbers, doesn't chase out of the strike zone a whole lot. So he's got the makings of a guy who should produce a little bit more than he has so far in his career. And he was a top prospect at one point. And the thing he still does do well, though, when he gets to the big leagues, is hit lefties. This year, for the A's, he was mostly in there to start against left-handers. He had 186 plate appearances, as I mentioned. 100 were against righties, and 86 were against lefties. It's really hard to have plate appearances against more lefties. I mean, there's just so many more righties in the big leagues that you're going to face. But against righties this year, Cameron hit 158 with a 14 WRC plus and just 3 extra base hits. Against lefties, Cameron hit 253, had an 817 OPS, good for a 134 WRC plus against left-handed pitching. He was 34% better than league average when he faced lefties this year. That is a player who, combined with the fact that he has speed and can play all 3 outfield positions, can be a platoon bench player on a major league team, and not just a struggling team like the Athletics, but could even have a role on a competing team. Now, for now, Cameron has a 40-man roster spot, and the Orioles actually cleared 2 spots on Thursday as well. They announced that Birch Smith, the right-handed pitcher, and the outfielder Daniel Johnson were both kind of quietly slipped through waivers earlier this week. They both cleared waivers, but both of them chose to become free agents and be outright off the roster rather than just go down to AAA Norfolk. And I talked about Birch Smith on yesterday's episode. I talked about how much I liked what Daniel Johnson did in AAA this year. I bet the Orioles offer both of them minor league deals with big league camp invites to come back to the Orioles and compete for a spot next season, but we will see what the open market has for Daniel Johnson and Birch Smith. But those moves, and with even adding Daz Cameron, still makes there only 37 players currently on the 40-man roster. So it's not like Cameron is filling up somebody else's spot. And even though in the next couple of days or so, Jorge Mateo, Tyler Wells, Kyle Bradish, and Felix Bautista all will get removed from the 60-day injured list and placed back on the 40-man. So theoretically, that bumps you back to 41. But at the same time, Corbin Burnes, Austin Slater, Eloy Jimenez, Anthony Santander, and James McCann will all become free agents, which will then bump the Orioles right back to 36 players on the 40-man roster. So for now, there is room to be holding Daz Cameron, even though he is not a player who you're thinking, oh yeah, of course, he's going to be on the opening day roster. Like, not even close to that. But at this point in the offseason, you see an opening for Cameron to be available. And if you're the O's, he's a guy they clearly like because they already brought him in once to be depth in AAA in 2023. He's still only 27, someone that Elias drafted. They clearly think he can pull it together. And with the hard hit numbers, the ability to play defense, the ability to run, and the ability to hit lefties, he has a shot at least to compete for like a fourth or fifth outfielder bench spot, maybe like the final hitter on the roster on opening day next year. I'm not saying it's likely. It'll all depend on what else the Orioles do this offseason, with the number one question being, is Santander back? And then the other questions fall in after that. But he's at least could be depth. Now, because he's out of options, if he doesn't make the opening day roster, by then he'd have to be DFA'd. And because it's already happened to him once, he could refuse his AAA assignment and just become a free agent. So there's a good chance that Cameron isn't even in the O's organization when they start playing baseball games, whether it be in the big leagues or in AAA in 2025. But it's a low risk, low cost move on a guy you think could pop. And you know what? At this point in the offseason, day one of the offseason, might as well make that move, and we shall see if the Orioles will have him stick around throughout the offseason and maybe try to compete for a spot next spring in Sarasota. But while they added Daz Cameron, former Astros guy, to the organization, they subtracted a former Astros guy from the organization on Thursday, and that was former big league pitching coach Chris Holt, who got demoted last year. Well, got more than a demotion this year. We'll talk about that and why the Orioles made the move coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with a $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by the DK Law Group. When you need a law firm, do you want the legal runaround, or would you rather have a no-nonsense approach? Well, you get the latter with the DK Law Group. The DK Law Group is a Maryland-based law firm who is redefining the legal process with their modern approach. The DK Law Group specializes in real estate law, estate planning, business law, and family law. They're tech savvy, they treat clients like family, and they focus on keeping your legal solutions simple. And they know that speed is key. By leveraging technology, the DK Law Group streamlines the process to serve you better and faster. So contact the DK Law Group today at dklawmd.com. And Locked On Orioles listeners can call today to schedule a free 30-minute consultation when you mention the tagline, Empowering Legacies. So as the offseason opened for the Orioles and every other team on Thursday, with the Dodgers completing a World Series victory on Wednesday night, the O's made a trade for Daz Cameron. They also subtracted somebody from the organization, and that is Chris Holt, who the Baltimore Banner and Masson reporting on Thursday that Holt is no longer with the Orioles organization. I don't think we've gotten the full reporting whether he was let go of his position or he left on his own accord, but either way, this was kind of a move where the writing was on the wall for Chris Holt. Now, if you're not familiar with Holt, he joined the Orioles organization along with Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal when they took over this organization in 2019. He was a minor league pitching coach in the Astros system with Sig and Mike. They really liked him, and they brought him over to be in 2019 a minor league pitching coordinator. And he spent 2 years in that role in 19 and 20. And then the Orioles opened up their big league pitching coach job in 2021, and they promoted Chris Holt to be the big league pitching coach. And he held that role for 3 years, the 21, 22, and 23 seasons. And of course, the Orioles pitching got better as the entire team got better and better throughout that stretch. But he was then demoted last offseason. The Orioles basically reassigned him to something closer to his old role. He was director of pitching, and while he oversaw pitching in the entire organization, he became once again much more focused on the minor league arms, which he was in his first job, versus, of course, the major league arms when he was the big league pitching coach. And the Orioles made that move. They ended up going outside and hiring Drew French to be the new pitching coach this year, and French did wonders with this pitching staff, pulling it together, especially with all the injuries that they suffered in 2024. And it seems like a lot of people really like Drew French in this role, but it felt like the same couldn't be said for Chris Holt. That seemed to be one of the big reasons why he was reassigned and basically demoted last offseason. It's kind of odd to see a big league pitching coach holding a job for 3 years for a good team get reassigned to a lower role and not get outright fired, or not like get that assignment and just decide to leave the organization instead. And I did hear some rumblings that Holt wasn't the most well-liked guy in that room, in that Orioles clubhouse. And it wasn't just from one person, from potentially multiple people. Wasn't exactly the best with just getting the message across and working with the players. And that's something we've talked about this offseason as the Orioles have made some more staff changes in their coaching staff. It's just like, hey, they're maybe not going to change the philosophy, but maybe this guy just isn't getting the message across. And the Orioles didn't change a whole lot in philosophy going from Chris Holt to Drew French. I mean, especially because Holt stayed in the organization in an important pitching role. But French just seems to be a guy who gets that message across a lot better. And it seemed like, from what I had heard, Chris Holt just wasn't gelling very well in that big league clubhouse. And maybe some of that trickled over to even the new role with the minor leaguers as well. And I just feel like when you make that demotion and you keep him in the organization, it feels like as a person, as a coach, he would really have to shine to put in the rearview mirror what happened last offseason. And it just felt like, especially because, when you would read articles, even about the minor league pitchers, or you would hear stuff about the development. The Orioles had a great year for pitching development in their minor league system, especially at the lower minor leagues. And you would read these articles and you'd talk to people and you'd hear about the stories on the broadcast, and just rarely would Chris Holt's name ever be brought up in those scenarios in terms of guys who have helped guys. And you combine that to the fact that he kind of was demoted. It just felt like the writing was on the wall for this move as this season went on. And I got to tell you, just talking with some people about this, they agreed, like, kind of the least surprising move of this, or this could end up being the least surprising move of this Orioles offseason, is that Chris Holt is no longer with the organization. Like, I wish him the best, and I hope he finds another role in baseball and can succeed there. But it just felt like, after what I had heard and what happened last year, that it wasn't working. And that's not saying like, oh, Chris Holt's a bad guy. It's just that he wasn't gelling with this organization. And once you make that move to kind of send him back to his old job after promoting him to big league pitching coach, if that happens to anybody, it just feels like the writing is on the wall and the pressure is really on to keep your job. And, again, we don't know if it was a straight up firing or a mutual parting of ways. Whatever it was, Holt will no longer be in this organization. And the Orioles have already announced that or at least the reporting has been that they have made the move to replace him. Forrest Herman has been promoted to that director of pitching role, which basically oversees all pitching in the organization, but especially at the minor league level. And meanwhile, Forrest Herman, a very, very, very well-liked guy in this organization. Orioles hired him in 2022 after he had been with the Reds and the Mariners, but it's specifically that P3 pitching performance center where a lot of Orioles have gone to, where the Orioles have hired a lot of coaches from. He was one of those guys who came over. Hired in 2022, he was the Ironbirds pitching coach in 22. He was the Bay Sox pitching coach in 2023 at the AA level. And the Orioles promoted him again. He became the lower level pitching coordinator this year. So very similar to what Chris Holt's first job was. And now he becomes director of pitching for the organization. And I will tell you, it seems like at some point Herman could get a promotion onto the big league staff to help out with pitching as well. But for now, really well-liked guy who's helped a lot with development among the pitchers in this system. He gets a much deserved promotion in the system to become the new director of pitching for the Orioles. And he most likely is not going to be the only coaching promotion the Orioles make this offseason. We've talked about it already with the staff changes they made. Freddie Gonzalez is out as bench coach. Both of the Orioles co-hitting coaches are gone. Jose Hernandez is gone as a major league coach. It's not going to be all outside hires. Like, they're going to make some promotions from the minors into those major league coaching roles. And those are going to be some of the big storylines, some of the big news that comes up here over the next couple of weeks in the Orioles offseason. But it's not going to be the only moves that are made and not going to be the only big news. As this offseason finally commences with the World Series over, things are going to really start to happen. So coming up next, I'm going to talk about the beginning of the offseason, what these early dates are that really matter, and what news is going to be coming down the pipeline here shortly. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app, well, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. So with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Now, we know the Major League Baseball season now is officially over with the Dodgers winning the World Series over the Yankees this week, so no Major League Baseball tickets for a little bit. But while you're waiting for them to come back out on Game Time for next year, how about some football, basketball, hockey tickets across the board? It's not just sports. If you are just straight up a baseball fan and you say, you know what, it's no sports for me until we get to spring training, I get it. How about comedy, concerts, and theater? You can get those tickets at Game Time as well. And they've got Game Time Picks. It's a curation system that makes it easier to save more on all of those tickets. And plus, the classic lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and more with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So to finish things off on this Friday episode of the podcast, if you're watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, you'll see still recording on Halloween. Still got the Bob Belcher get up here. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. Also, if you could, leave a 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen, whether it be Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That really, really helps out the show when you do that as well. But let's talk a little bit about the offseason, because it has officially commenced, right? The Orioles weren't even the first team to make a move when they acquired Daz Cameron. It was like the offseason had barely started. It was like Thursday morning, and the Braves and the Angels made a swap, sending Jorge Soler to Anaheim, and the right-handed starting pitcher Griffin Canning goes to the Braves. And we were off getting news, right? We saw the retirements of Daniel Hudson and Alex Kirilloff, among other news that came out on Thursday. And it's going to continue because the offseason has commenced. So Thursday, with the World Series ending on Wednesday night, Thursday started basically a 5-day period where the offseason kicks off, but it's kind of like the soft launch of the offseason in this 5-day period. The first thing to know is free agents can negotiate with their team, but not with other teams. So for example, for these first 5 days, Corbin Burnes and Anthony Santander can negotiate with the Orioles, but they cannot talk to any other team for 5 days. Now, generally, that doesn't make a difference, and guys don't usually sign deals in these 5 days, but it is a little bit of an exclusive negotiating window. Now, again, these guys are not going to sign in this window. They want to go to full free agency, but right now, Santander, Burnes, Means, Slater, McCann, they can only talk with the Orioles until 5 p.m. Eastern time on Monday, and that is when the full free agency opens to everyone. Now, in these 5 days, you also have to make all of your option decisions. So we talked about them a little bit. The Orioles have some club option decisions to make, basically meaning there is a number that they could choose to pick up the option, in which they would pay that player that number for next year, or they can decline the option, which means they are just not going to pay that player and he is going to become a free agent. Ryan O'Hearn has an $8 million option. As I've said, they should pick it up. Danny Coulomb has a $4 million team option. They should pick it up. Sir Anthony Dominguez has an $8 million team option. They should pick it up. Eloy Jimenez has a $16 million team option. They're going to decline that one. And Cionel Perez has a $2.2 million team option, but his is a little different. If they decline it, he doesn't become a free agent. He just goes back to arbitration, but they will probably pick up that one as well. And again, all of those decisions have to be made by Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. Some of them might be made earlier in the weekend, so maybe Monday's episode we'll be talking about that. But the Orioles tend to take all of these things right down to their deadlines, so I wouldn't be surprised if it takes until 4 p.m. Monday for us to hear about what the Orioles have done with these options. Now, these 5 days are also important because they include all of the qualifying offer decisions. We've talked about this a little bit, but the qualifying offer is basically a way to help out, quote unquote, small market teams when their big name players become free agents. So if you offer a player the qualifying offer, you can only be offered it once in your career. It is a 1-year deal that this year is worth $21.05 million on a 1-year contract. You can offer it to players who are becoming free agents if they have not gotten the qualifying offer before, and as long as they have been on your team for the entire season. Now, you don't want to offer it to every free agent, because if you offer it to a guy like James McCann, he's going to take it because James McCann's a guy who's going to get a 1-year, $6 million deal. Why would you offer him a deal that's 1 year, $21 million? So not everyone gets it. It's for the guys who are going to go out there and get the big contracts. Now, this rarely happens, but sometimes guys will accept the qualifying offer and just play on a 1 more year deal for $21 million. But most of the time they do decline it and go get another deal. Now, the Orioles will most likely offer the qualifying offer to both Corbin Burnes and Anthony Santander because both of them are likely to get much better than a 1 year, $21 million deal. But the point of the Orioles offering it is if you offer a player the qualifying offer and they don't take it and they sign with another team for obviously a lot more money, you get some draft pick compensation to at least get something in replace for losing your big free agent. So if the Orioles lose Burnes or Santander or both to another team and they offer them the qualifying offer, the Orioles will get a draft pick that will be a good one. It'll be a draft pick that sits in between the first and second rounds of the 2025 MLB draft and will, of course, up their draft pool budget as well. And we've also got some other dates coming up, right? You know, we have this period until 5 p.m. Monday. Also, the Gold Glove winners announced on Sunday. So we'll see if Ryan Mountcastle or Colton Cowser can win a Gold Glove. But also trades are open. We talked about it already. The Orioles made a trade acquiring Daz Cameron on Thursday. Trades open up immediately and they can be made all the way until next year's trade deadline. So we could have some moves being made there. And then kind of the offseason kicks off. We get the GM meetings, which are next week in San Antonio when all the GMs get down. Generally, not a lot of moves are made then, but we do get some good media availability and some quotes, and sometimes some more minor moves are made at the GM meetings. Generally, at the GM meetings, all the GMs feel each other out, essentially, to see what they're thinking about this offseason. Then they go back home and start thinking about moves to make. Then you have the qualifying offer deadline, so that offers need to be made by the teams by Monday. And then the players who get the qualifying offer, they have until November 19th to decide whether or not they will be accepting the qualifying offer. Again, most players end up declining it. That November 19th, that is also the Rule 5 draft protection deadline. So guys that are eligible for the Rule 5 draft that need to be added to the 40-man roster need to be protected by then. Brandon Young is a slam dunk candidate for the Orioles. There's a couple more guys that are maybes, but there's a good chance it's just Brandon Young and nobody else, the pitcher who's on the precipice of getting to the big leagues. Then November 22nd, that is the non-tender deadline. That is for players who are arbitration eligible, who you decide, hey, the money they're going to get in arbitration is just not worth it. They're not a big part of this team. Instead of giving them money, we are just going to non-tender them, which basically means they become a free agent earlier than they expected and they go into free agency. I would say Emmanuel Rivera and Matt Bowman are the two top non-tender candidates that the Orioles have who are arbitration eligible this offseason. Then you get to the big dates when the moves really start to happen. The winter meetings are December 8th through 11th this year. That's when teams really start wheeling and dealing. Also includes the Rule 5 draft on December 11th. So if you feel like for the next month, hey, the offseason's slow, there's barely anything happening, just wait until those winter meetings. That is usually when stuff really heats up. And then February 12th, pitchers and catchers report. So, hey, it's not that far away to start to see some baseball on your screens once again. But we here on this podcast will have it all covered, all throughout the offseason here on the Locked On Orioles podcast, throughout the month of November, actually all the way through those winter meetings that end on December 11th, we will still be going 5 days a week. Pretty much every day, Monday through Friday, we will have a new episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast out in your podcast feeds, out on YouTube. Tell people about it. Hey, we got all the offseason coverage right here for you, so do not go anywhere. Even though the season is over, we keep chugging along here on the Locked On Orioles podcast. That'll do it for today's episode. We will be back on Monday. There's a good chance the Orioles have made some of these qualifying offer or option decisions by then, and if they have, we'll certainly break them down on Monday's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.